So you've got to imagine you're listening to this as a Middle Eastern person. This is how they would have heard this. Okay. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. When do you normally inherit?
When the person dies.
When the person dies. So what is the younger son saying to the father? I wish you were
dead. Drop dead, give me the money. Yeah.
There would have been a sharp intake of breath there. This was not just an offence against the father. This was an offence against the community. Don't forget, in days gone by, there was very little privacy. So, and even now, communities will feel a sense of shame and dishonour collectively when something, maybe one person transgresses. So at this, it's horrific. Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. The word there, property, in the Greek is bios. Interesting Greek, which is life. It's more than just give me what's in the bank. Give me my share of the family life. Now don't forget, nowadays, of course, in the West, your wealth is often invested in the bank. But here, it's an agricultural community. Where is your wealth invested? It's found where?
Livestock, cattle, fields.
Livestock, fields, cattle. Therefore, for him to get his share of the property, he divided his property between them, 1/3 to the younger, 2/3 to the older. Effectively, the father would have had to sold stuff. This was a big thing. It wasn't just go to the cash point machine, the ATM, and draw out my share. It was a real division of the life of that family. That's a big thing, isn't it? Okay? And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed what?
Pigs.
Okay.
He's Jewish.
He's Jewish. Okay. So collective revulsion here at that. That's how much this son has fallen. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he gave to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Now, what he's probably saying there, the father would have had a number of people working for him, the slaves, bond servants, who were part of the family unit, but the other people were hired servants. They worked for a wage. And there's a sense here, what the son is trying to do, he said, take me on not as one of the bond servants, because that means I would be living back in the family. Treat me as a hired hand. And there's a sense here, is the son trying to earn money to pay back his father? I'm not too sure. It's an interesting question there. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Now, the way I describe it is this. You've seen pictures of the Queen of England, haven't you?
Yes.
Now, sometimes very important people, you don't see them run, okay? It would be demeaning. That's true culturally. Sometimes in some cultures, wise people, older people, important people do not run. That would be seen as they wouldn't do that. You cannot imagine the Queen of England getting up in the morning, coming outside Buckingham Palace and hitching up her skirt and running for the bus. You wouldn't do that, would you? And so in this culture, the sense of this father running would be seen as disrespectful culturally. So that's again an indication of how much the Father loves the Son, that he's doing something actually countercultural. But there's another thing which some commentators think might be happening here. Maybe there was another reason. It says the Father threw his arms around the Son. You see, don't forget, who had the Son insulted?
The community.
The community, as well as the Father. So maybe he wasn't that safe.
Yeah.
Maybe he wasn't that safe. And maybe
The law said he had to be put to death.
Yeah.
Dishonored his father.
Yeah. So maybe, we can't be, but culturally it would certainly fit. The Father is actually not just welcoming, he's protecting his Son too. Incidentally, going back to the birth narratives, it said that Joseph took Mary to Bethlehem. There was no reason for that. There was no reason for Mary to go with Joseph, because it was Joseph who was signing on the dotted line. Apart from, maybe she wasn't safe. Why? People knew she was pregnant. They had not been married. So there was a sense there, right at the beginning, the birth narratives, maybe Joseph, it's better to have her with me. She might not be safe. Okay, anyway, that's let's just carry on. Father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For this son, my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. What the Father is doing, he's giving the best robe. He's saying he's now a member of the family again. Now, wait a minute. There's an element of maths here. So the son had a third. That left the older son having 2/3. Okay. That's all been spent in wild living. If the son is welcomed back as a member of the family again, that's going to be split again, isn't he? So the older son loses out again.
Exactly.
His share of the inheritance goes down. Which incidentally, this is something Tim Keller just hints at. The cost to these, there's always a cost in redemption. Yeah? There's a cost in redemption. And although the cost of redemption is not overt there are hints of that. That the older son actually takes a financial hit there in the redemption of the younger son. But praise God, we have the perfect older son. Who is the perfect older son? Jesus. Jesus is the perfect older son who celebrates with his father. He celebrates with his father that the prodigal is back, the younger son is back, and is willing to make that sacrifice. So it's interesting, isn't it, pursuing these lines of thought. And that's something you're going to need to perhaps read a book about. But that's the advantage, isn't it, of just reading some commentaries and reading some books. Let's just carry on a bit, because it is a great story. His older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry, get this, verse 29, and refused to go in. His father came out, and there's an absolute mark of disrespect here from the older son, which I think actually Stuart picked up on. The older son refuses to go in and expects his father to come outside. So actually, we see the disrespect of the younger son. We see the disrespect of the older son here too. The mask is slipping, isn't it? The mask is slipping. His father came out and entreated him. Again, the father didn't have to do that. That's an utter act of grace. That is demeaning to the father. For the father, actually we can imagine that in our culture, couldn't we? That is the father wouldn't normally, if the father was given respect, he wouldn't have to do that. But the father willingly does that. He willingly does that. He answered his father, look, these many years I have served you and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. It's law, isn't it? There's no love there. There's no sense of willingly serving the Father out of love. It's out of duty. It's out of obligation.
It's like a boss and
It's yeah. But when the son of yours came, who has devoured your son, and that's been marked out already, your son, it's not my brother, your son, you're probably with prostitutes, you kill the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, this is the father, you are always with me. All that is mine is yours. In other words, he said, I love you too. I love you too. This is how you're repaying it. It's not good, is it? I loved you. You're in my family. And yet you're rejecting that. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive, who was lost and is found. So there's a lot there, isn't there, which we wouldn't normally pick up because actually we're not part of that culture. And that's the advantage of perhaps doing a little bit of background reading, which you might get some of these things from commentaries and some books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Now, just expound is that everything I have is yours. Could also mean, expounding again, the kingdom is yours. You have everything. But the attitude of the older son is he doesn't give it back to the father, he keeps it.
He doesn't realize he has it.
There are all sorts of things you can look at this. There are all sorts of things you can get out. But what I'm saying is the controlling expository principle here is the key is he's speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to the older brothers. That doesn't exclude mentioning the grace sound in the younger son. But if we're to be true to that passage, that's the reason Jesus spoke the passage. Told the parable.
he's teaching something for the pastor.
He's speaking to the church of the day, the Old Testament church.
Speaking to his synagogue.
So we've done that, we thought about that, and we've got a better understanding of what the text says. But then now we've got to put the message together. Well, we're not going to do that now, but these are the foundational principles, isn't it? What is the passage saying? We can perhaps see how the original people heard it, why Jesus told this, who he was talking to. We would then need to say, right, what does God want to say to us? Or to whatever context you're preaching into. Okay? A great book is Kenneth Bailey, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, published by IVP Academic in the States. You can actually buy an electronic version of that. And he's done brilliant stuff on some of the birth narratives. And actually, these recent years has been pretty instrumental, because actually, if you look at the New International Version, where was... Now, I'll just show you the text in the ESV. If you come from a culture where people have nativity plays, yeah, and at Christmas all the children dress up and they take the part, and there's that famous phrase, "There's no room in the inn." Now the New International, the latest version of the New International, probably takes the correct line and doesn't translate that as inn, but there's no room in the guest house. And if you read, and each chapter is standalone, he looks at those and shows how inn was never the right word to use. It was guest house. And it's a marvellous, rich exposition of the Luke accounts of Jesus' birth. You know, we have nativity stories. The church did that, and there were all sorts of other proto-gospels which were around, which kind of filled in some of the gaps. And so, in some ways, the church has been influenced by other biblical sources. How many wise men were there?
don't know.
We don't know. How many do we sing about?
3,
3.
because of the 3 gifts.
Yeah. How did Mary get to Jerusalem? Riding on a
Donkey.
a pregnant lady, nearly term, is not going to ride on a donkey. But it doesn't say anything about donkey. What we're saying is,
Jerusalem, wasn't it Bethlehem?
sorry, Bethlehem. It's Bethlehem. But sorry, that we look at these texts.
Go past Jerusalem to get to Bethlehem.
Sorry.
She had to go past
Yeah,
Jerusalem
yes.
to get to Bethlehem.
We look through familiar eyes, and we assume there are things there which aren't. So, there's all this debate, where was Jesus born? Well, Kenneth Bailey says probably, if as the latest version of the New International says there was no room in the guest room, in Middle Eastern times, you can read about this in the Old Testament too, you would have had a fairly simple house, and sometimes a guest room was tagged on the roof. Was it Elijah who lived on the roof? Yeah. Or it was tagged along on the side. Okay. But there was no room in the guest room. Where, therefore, was Jesus? Well, you've got to understand, inside a Middle Eastern house, it was divided into 2 sections. Probably the living quarters was on a raised area like this. Okay. What lived down here? If the family lived up there, what lived down there? Livestock. You still see that in cultures all around the world. And I've seen this, actually. And the thing which divides the 2 living areas is the manger. So when it says there was no room in the guest room, where was Jesus born? Well, probably in a normal house. Where was the manger? We think the manger is kept outside because that's where they kept animals, but they didn't. They kept animals inside, which was, and which is why this is interesting, because the nativity version is there's no room in the inn. Where's Jesus going to be born? So you've got Joseph knocking on the doors and no room. Wait a minute. A woman is just about to give birth. Could you imagine, even in our culture, turning a woman just about to give birth away? You can.
Happens amongst the cultures.
Well, I can tell you something. It wouldn't happen even now in Middle Eastern culture, where the act of hospitality is a spiritual act. It's an act of worship. So a Palestinian even would have read the old, this idea of Jesus trying to get room and no room in the inn, no room. That would never have happened. It would never have happened. And actually looking at and if you read Kenneth Bailey, what I'm saying is it's Bible study. It's going to get you thinking. And when you read the nativity events, through those eyes, you think, yes, you actually see some of the background, and it could only have been written by someone who had in-depth knowledge of that culture. In other words, it wasn't a fabrication of the later church. This happened. And there are all sorts of hints in the narrative to show this happened.
It's interesting that they mention the census. Because if they mention the census of Rome, it's a noted historical fact.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to key in which year, possibly closest to the month, also with astronomy linking in about the time, because you'll find different astronomers throughout the centuries.
I think there is a struggle because there were many census at those times. So I think the best guess was it 3 AD or was it 3 years before or 6 years before? So we're not quite certain. People will.
BC is what some say. I think it's 3 BC.
3 BC, yeah, 3 BC. But what I'm saying is that we look at the events and we see something which is absolutely rooted in history and in the culture. And sometimes we just need to step back and read the Bible without necessarily some of the baggage which we've laid on to that. Okay. Point is, when we exposit the text, we're going to have to do work. And that's where, you know, a study Bible or commentary, you can get one volume commentaries as well, but it's just going to be helpful. We're going to mine more out of the text as we listen to what other people have read and thought. Okay? But that's a really, I love that book. It's a beautiful book. And you can get a digital version. Okay? So your assignment, don't forget, I would be thinking, what is the topic you're going to choose? That's what I think you need to be thinking about. What's your topic?